was said.
Okay, Gary, it was said by social Darwinists when whites came here that the Aboriginal race would die out naturally. Can you discuss this in regard to the arrival of whites?
Social Darwinism is a reflection of the arrogance and racism of Western society at the time and still, in that it neglects to mention the enormous assistance given to Aboriginal people in dying out by the British first and subsequent Australian governments. Aboriginal people in Australia have been subjected to brutal, extended, continuous acts of genocide against our people. That's the simple truth of the matter.
Excellent. All right, just cut it. I'd like to do it one more time. And take your MP and ask you then. All right.
Social Darwinism is an example of the... Start again, sorry.
That's all right.
See if
No, that's difficult to do.
Social Darwinism is a reflection of the racism and paternalism of Western society at the time and now, in that it neglects to mention the enormous efforts made to exterminate the Aboriginal people. If you read The Fatal Shore, if you read Eric Wilmot's book Pemulwuy, you will realise the truth of the origin of Australian history, whereby not only were concerted attempts made to exterminate Aboriginal people in very genocidal campaigns, Aboriginal people themselves mounted an active and strong resistance almost from day one. The Eora tribe, under the leadership of one of the first Aboriginal resistance heroes, Pemulwuy, fought a very brave and active resistance campaign. In fact, the first 3 military campaigns conducted by the British on Australian soil were lost by the British. And this led to extensive attempts to exterminate the Aboriginal people. And Australians just don't seem to realise this. And it's important to understand that these attempts at genocide continue to this day in the minds of Aboriginal people. No other people on earth, including the Jewish people and the Gypsies during the Second World War, have ever been subjected to the sort of extensive, long-term attempts at genocide that the Aboriginal people in Australia have.
Excellent, okay, thanks. What is the struggle for land rights all about?
In 1788, the longest dispute and problem that still exists in Australia today began. Land rights is a means by which Aboriginal people can go through a process of reconstruction of their own society to whatever form that they want. It's a means by which Aboriginal people can attain economic independence. Economic independence in the sort of society that now surrounds us is the only means by which any group of people can express genuine self-determination. Aboriginal people need to take control of their own lives again in the Australia of tomorrow. The only means by which that many people see us being able to do this is through the concept of land rights. In the absence of a complete and absolute recognition of Aboriginal sovereignty, something which Aboriginal people never ceded, but nevertheless, in the absence of a complete recognition of Aboriginal sovereignty, land rights is the next best option through which Aboriginal people can attain that economic independence and freedom for the first time in 200 years. Economic independence will give Aboriginal people the ability to control their own affairs, to again, for the first time, make the decisions that affect their lives. For 200 years, we've been denied that.
Okay, so what does that say for kind of black-white relations?
It's a reflection of the reality of black-white relations. Black-white relations in Australia are appalling. Black-white relations in Australia are appalling because of the incredible extent of racism that infests this society. Australia is one of the most racist societies in the Western world. I mean that's just a statement of reality. If you don't believe me, ask any non-Anglo-Saxon person in Australia. Everybody knows that. But the problem in terms of white Australia and Aboriginal Australia is that the gulf of misunderstanding there is just so enormous. I mean, we should always remember that racism is born of fear and ignorance. And if there is one group in Australia who is subjected to more vilification because of fear and ignorance about them, it is the Aboriginal people. And so, you know, I mean, white Australians need to completely rethink and re-understand the Aboriginal people. And I mean, it's understandable in a sense that white Australians are so negative in their attitudes to Aboriginal Australians when you consider the absolute lies that 99% of the Australian people have been taught in their education system first, and afterwards these attitudes are maintained and perpetuated through the media. I mean, the total misinformation that is constantly bombarded on white Australians about Aboriginal Australians, it's little wonder there is so much fear and ignorance out there in white Australia.
Okay, that's great, because I was going to say, Gary.
So, we're set.
And take your cue.
Land rights means different things to different Aboriginal people. In the north of Australia, where many of the traditional cultural patterns are intact and the languages are still alive, it can mean something completely different to people in the south, where they may need the land as the beginnings of an economic base on which to build their economic independence, on which to revitalise their culture and all the rest of it. It's important to understand those differences. I mean, you can't have one universal set of land rights that's applicable nationally. People don't, it's again part of people's ignorance about Aboriginal people. People don't know that there was not one Aboriginal people when Captain Cook arrived. There were 500 different nations, sovereign nations of people, speaking 500 different languages, with different, differing aspects to their culture and their traditions and their stories and their legends. And so you can't, therefore, today have a universal land rights that's applicable to everybody. You must deal with each individual Aboriginal community and talk with those Aboriginal people about what their needs and what their aspirations are, and let each of those communities determine for themselves what land rights means for them and what they need to get justice for themselves and to go through the process of reconstruction that they need to after 200 years of war.
Okay, having said that, what would be an example of what, say, land rights might mean to people who live in cities?
It can vary. I mean, the needs of city people who live in the city are different from people who live in the country, but also remember that the phenomenon of a so-called urban Aborigine is largely a myth. I, for example, am considered as your quintessential urbane Aborigine. But the fact is, I grew up in the bush. I never set foot in a city till I was 16. All the people my generation that I know of are in exactly the same boat, and even people have got to understand that land rights means different things to different Aboriginal people. There is no universal land rights concept that is applicable to all Aboriginal people in Australia. That's a misconception that's largely due to the fact that most Australians don't know that when Captain Cook arrived there was not just one Aboriginal people, but there are in fact 500 different nations of Aboriginal people, different sovereign nations speaking different languages, 500 different languages, and each with their own cultural traditions. So therefore today you can't expect a land rights model that is applicable to someone in Arnhem Land to be equally suitable for someone who lives in Melbourne. There has to be discussion with each individual Aboriginal community around Australia to determine their aspirations and their needs. There needs to be maximum decentralisation of power in the whole Aboriginal industry as it exists today. So therefore each community themselves, the people who live in those communities, are the ones who determine what the future of that particular community is. There can't be individual land rights grants because, I mean, individual ownership is an alien concept to Aboriginal people. There's always, the concept of land rights has always involved communal ownership because that's the Aboriginal way. And the other misconception that most white Australians are very frightened of is the fear that Aborigines are going to claim their backyard or their swimming pool or their sort of little patch of lawn out in suburbia. Nothing could be further from the truth. The Aboriginal land rights claim in the south of Australia, southeast of Australia, are very specific in relation to former reserve lands and vacant Crown land. In fact, legislation is so tight as to what we can and can't claim. I mean, there's no chance of people out there in suburbia losing their backyard. Besides, we don't want it, folks.
Okay, what do you see as been the major gains and losses of the land rights struggle over the years?
There haven't been too many gains. There have been occasional inspirational wins, like the Gurindji land rights struggle. Sorry?
Start again saying, if one looks at the land rights struggle, whatever you want to say, just indicate what you're talking about.
There haven't been many gains over the years, but there have been occasional significant victories, like the Gurindji people being granted their land by Gough Whitlam in 1973 after a very inspirational 9-year battle where they took on the territory government, the Australian government, multinational corporations and the English government, and they won. But the Gurindji people winning their land meant that, there were still 499 other Aboriginal peoples throughout Australia who still haven't gained any land. There's a feeling in white Australia that Aborigines already got too much land. And again, this comes back to their failure to understand that if the Aboriginal people in Arnhem Land get a significant area of their land granted, that has absolutely no beneficial effect whatsoever on the Melbourne Aboriginal community in Fitzroy, for example. Each Aboriginal community needs to go through each process of gaining its compensation for the crimes that have been committed against each individual Aboriginal community. And until that's done, there can be no sense that we've really gained anything. Until all Aboriginal communities in Australia that seek it have attained their economic independence, are in full control of their own destinies, there is no resolution to the problem.
Okay. Given, as you were saying, the huge diversity in Aboriginal cultures, how can we define Aboriginality today? Also looking at the misconceptions and the kind of misrepresentations that have happened.
I think one of the things that's constantly perplexed Aboriginal people is the constant need for white society to define us. You don't need to ask Aboriginal people who Aborigines are. Aboriginal people know who are Aborigines, who are coconuts, who are born-again blackfellas, who are shonkies, and who are the crooks and scoundrels. If anybody ever wants to know who or who isn't a Koori person, it's very simple. Go and ask the Koori community. They'll tell you. It's really that simple.
Okay. Do you think Aborigines are still fighting to be seen within Australian society?
Compared to 20 years ago, I don't think that Aboriginal people are as invisible as they used to be. It's most definitely, if you look at the newspapers cuttings of 20 or 30 years ago, the references to Aboriginal people are occasional. They're usually planted on page 29. They're usually about this big, and inevitably they refer to terms like natives, coons in some instances, things like that. But today, I think that despite the appallingly superficial nature of most of the media coverage, there's no doubt that the media coverage has increased. But I think it's important that people realise that the reason Australians have to sit up and take notice of Aboriginal people nowadays is largely because of the efforts of Aboriginal people themselves in the last 20 years to make themselves heard. The Aboriginal Embassy demonstration in 1972 had repercussions around the world. It made headlines around the world, and no longer were Australians able to conveniently sweep under the carpet the problems of the Aboriginal people. They couldn't hide it from the world anymore. So Australia's been forced to sit up and take notice because of the very real problems that exist. The health statistics alone of Aboriginal Australians would be appalling in even a third world country. And yet this is a very affluent Western country. And, people can deny that racism exists in their society till the cows come home. The figures, the statistics, scream the other message. Now, the world knows the truth. Sooner or later, Australians are going to have to face up to the truth and do something about it.
Excellent. Okay. You work in the media. What has been the predominant media image of Aborigines, of men and women?
I think you'll find that generally speaking, the Aboriginal people who make it into the media and are heard in the media are generally people who the media approves of. They certainly don't approve of me, but then they've been forced over the years to to report the activities of people like myself because of the message that we carry. People just can't. I mean, I've challenged on numerous occasions in the last 20 years anyone in this country to a debate about racism and the nature of racism in this country and what its effects are on Aboriginal people. Nobody will debate me because they know that what we speak is the truth. But in other instances, mostly, you'll find that most television programs' portrayal of Aboriginal people are appalling because they try and portray Aboriginal people as brown, white people with brown skins. Now that's not the case. Aboriginal people in here and in here are almost diametrically the opposite of Anglo-Saxon Australians, starting with our total difference at the base unit of our society is the extended family. The base unit of white Australian, Anglo-Australian society is the nuclear family. From that point on, ne'er the twain shall meet. I mean, yours is a competitive, materialistic society. Ours is a non-competitive, non-materialistic society. The concept of private property, strictly speaking, doesn't exist in Aboriginal society. So, Aboriginal people are not only externally different, we're very different in here, and that's something that most Australians fail to appreciate when they try and understand us.
Given that, it seems as if Aboriginality has got a lot to offer Australia.
Absolutely. I've said for a long time that ultimately we do have an opportunity to create a unique society in this country here if we have the desire to do so. We are isolated enough from the rest of the world, completely insignificant little country we are. In real terms, in economic terms, Australia's a nothing. Nobody cares about Australia. We are geographically isolated. We are in the perfect position, if we so desired, to create a unique, humanitarian, compassionate society. And if people want to do that, and I think a lot of Australians do, then we're better to start with the cultural values that have been part of this land for 40, 100,000 years. It makes a lot of sense. If people really do want to learn how to relate to each other as human beings, rather as some sort of commercial commodity that one can exploit, if we want to get down to compassionate, humanitarian, egalitarian values, if we want a genuinely egalitarian Australia, start with the Koories. We can teach us a far better way.